I think developing a show is kind of like designing your very own supersuit. The premise is your heads-up display. It's the lens through which you see everything. The format of an episode, that's like the cut of the suit. Can you step into it and have it form nicely around you? It feels snug, but you can breathe. You can move around confidently and gracefully. You can walk and run and fly and do awesome air kicks. The premise and the format can both be developed. You can test them by creating other content, and you can document them until the theory feels great. But the only way to figure out if this supersuit is actually super and actually feels like your suit is to pilot the thing. This far into the series, I kind of have the super suit in theory. I have the premise of the show, where every episode a creator dissects a signature story. I have the format, that rundown. I know what blocks and beats I'm going to hit pretty much every time. And so now I have to take that suit out of the box, try it on, and move around in it. In other words, it's time to pilot this thing. But the way we pilot things in general is kind of nonsensical. We take all these variables that are involved in a project like a show, and we try to test them all at once in one single episode, and that makes no sense. But there are actually 3 things that you have to pilot for a brand new show, and they don't all have to happen inside an actual episode. So how do we do this? We think about the supersuit metaphor again. So first, I'm gonna test out whether or not I, as the talent, as the host, wanna commit to making this show. Do I wanna be known for it? Do I wanna fly around the internet as host man, defender of storytellers everywhere? In other words, do I wanna put on this suit? So in my previous show, Unthinkable, I just did a mini series of 6 episodes that kinda sorta resembled how stories happen. I didn't agonize over the packaging, over the perfect rundown for those episodes, or over the marketing and growth. All I wanted to do was reduce the variables down to whether or not I would want to sort of embody this show for a while. Now, halfway through that series, I was like, sold. I want to put on the suit. I want to be known for this. I want to do it for a while. And so I'm going to start developing the supersuit in earnest. And the first and most important part of that is the premise, because that's kind of like the heads-up display. It's the technology that like runs the entire suit. So I'm going to shift gears and actively develop that premise. As we covered in episode 1 of this series, I tested out how to pitch my premise to the world a few different ways, and none of them looked like an episode. I used my newsletter, I used social content, I used everything on the internet like a comedian uses small comedy clubs to validate that this premise actually resonates with others. Okay, so I want to put on the suit. I tested and piloted that. I have the premise developed. I have those goggles inside the mask to run the entire operation. And now I have to like tailor the suit to actually fit me so I can run and jump and do awesome air kicks. So the last remaining piece to pilot is the format. It's like the fit of this project on me, the host of it. This is where we need something that looks like a pilot episode. So said another way, it's time to take the suit out of the box, try it on, get comfy and cozy in it, and then fly around in it. And so how does that come together? Nice and clean and easy. Come on, have you heard any of the stuff I've been saying here? It's always a mess. It's always a mess, but this is a mess that makes me happy because this is a mess I can confidently control. So I head back to the document where I store that rundown as written in theory, and then I use it to prepare an actual episode of How Stories Happen. So of course I have to book a guest for this pilot, and I decided to talk to Andrew Davis. Andrew and I have a really long-standing, great relationship, and I didn't want to introduce a new variable to a pilot. I didn't want to have to connect with a brand new guest, so I'm gonna talk to a friend. Andrew also has a long history of being really articulate and thoughtful about this storytelling stuff, and I'm familiar with the body of work he's built as an author and a speaker, so I knew he had some signature stories that were well honed, and also that he'd be open to me kind of coaching him through improvements. So it was the perfect guest for the pilot. Then it's time to prep for the actual interview. And now this is the fun part, because you take the theory you've worked so hard to do, like, is this gonna be real? And it starts to look real. So I take the rundown as written, I paste that onto a new document, and I start to prepare all of my research and the flow of an actual interview and episode, not a theoretical one. So then I'm sort of constructing the script using that rundown, and I realize, hold on, this is the rundown for a typical episode, and episode 1 is not the typical episode. People might not listen to the trailer, they might be new to the show, they might discover the show 100 episodes in and come back to episode 1. Episode 1 is an event, and it's a pillar episode. So I have to add this section that explains the premise in greater detail, which is not part of the typical rundown. So again, when you start to actually run into resistance or make an actual thing, theory has to give way to the variables you encounter in reality. And then finally, I scan that rundown to highlight key moments I wanted to have with Andrew or add new questions. And I'm practiced enough as an interviewer that I know 99% of my questions with Andrew will be follow-up questions, so I didn't really have to engineer anything all that new, adding clever questions or stuff like that. We're keeping it simple because we're just piloting one key variable. We're piloting the format. And now I'm ready to record. Now, as I mentioned, Andrew's a friend, so I'm not worried about whether or not he's gonna bring his A game. He's gonna be warm because we're buddies. He's also a professional at this, so I know he's gonna show up well on the mic and on camera. I'm removing those variables. But so much of an interview success is dependent on not just the research and the questions, but the environment you create. Is the environment conducive to a great interview? And although I don't need that stuff for Andrew necessarily, I have thought about that at this point of developing how stories happen. So here are a few things I've already figured out to create an environment conducive to a great interview. First, the way I package and present the show. That matters. I want it to be professional. So the cover art, the description, and the website. Then I need to share the right details to guests ahead of time. For example, it's always so annoying and maybe even stress-inducing to wonder as a guest, wait, is this show audio or audio and video? Also, I try to give my guests outs to make it easy for them to say yes and to show up well. So for example, when I reach out to them, I'll say, hey, if you don't have an idea for a story that we can dissect, here are some helpful prompts. Or if that doesn't work, I'll use some examples of other episodes that worked. Finally, when they show up, what are your first moments together? Are they warm? Because guests reflect the emotions that you convey. So you have to connect well even before you hit record. Then during the interview, two things. One, don't make the moment you hit record like an event. People stiffen up, right? I'll just be chatting away as if with a friend and I'll say, oh, I always forget, let me hit record. So you were saying your dog, and now it's not an event that stiffens them. And the second thing is, I am trying to make sure it's not just what I'm asking, but how I'm asking these questions that creates the right environment and triggers the right responses. How you disagree. Are you attacking them, or is it from a place of generosity? How you set up a question. Do you bring a little element of drama? Maybe you want them to reflect or be somber. You need to slow down. You need to feel somber.
So it is getting close to launch day, and I'm exhausted, as you can tell by everything of me, but I'm pushing through. And the thing that broke me through today was I was walking the dog listening to my own guest appearance on another podcast. By the way, I think we should all consistently consume the work we put out, whether we're a guest or we're the creator, because it's like an athlete watching game tape. You learn a lot by consuming your own work. So if you're like a podcaster who goes, oh, I hate the sound of my own voice, well, you chose poorly, my friend. I'm a speaker. I can't stand watching my talks. You chose poorly. Like, you learn a ton, way more than in the moment or even others telling you things. So I always consume my work, as the audience would. I read my newsletters in my inbox. I listen to my podcasts in my preferred podcast player, and and I watch videos of my speaking, all that stuff, because I spot things, and those things show up in my work the next time to make me better. So this time around, what gave me energy and what will make me better is when I was a guest on this other show, they asked me about something I created in the past and how did it feel to create that. And what I noticed is I immediately brought a negative energy, or at least a diminished energy, to the response, because I didn't want to brag, be like, it was amazing and I was amazing and here are 17 things that were awesome and I loved, although I could have said that. But I didn't want to come off a certain way, or maybe just naturally we all start to critique our work when asked about it. And so this is huge to learn, because when I'm constructing the rundown and the pilot for How Stories Happen, I was going to ask people after they share their story, how did that feel? They just did something vulnerable, something that they got their creative fingerprints all over. And now I'm asking them to just tell me how it felt. And they're not going to be like, it felt amazing, I'm so awesome. They're going to bring a negative energy like I did, or at least they're going to couch their answers. And that's not what I want. I want them to be excited and celebratory and analyze things, at least to start the analysis, from a place of like feeling uplifted by the piece or noticing what worked. So maybe that's on me now. Instead of me asking that question, maybe what I should do is ask them about something I noticed. Hey, this was my favorite piece. Talk about that. Because I'm giving them permission to nerd out and celebrate. They don't have, if I ask them even what's your favorite piece of it, they would be like, well, now it's on me to like celebrate my own work. So I'll let them off the hook. and I'll say, I noticed this one thing. So while they're performing it, I should jot down, oh, this is something we could geek out about that's tiny. They think no one notices. I noticed. Let's talk about that. And that could get the analysis piece of the episode started. So consume your work. It's game tape. You notice little things that translate into other projects or make the next iteration of that same project better.
So this stagecraft, that's for a speaker, but on the stage of a podcast or in a video series is actually the piece that we don't talk about. It's your performance of the question that matters just as much, if not more, than the words you use to ask it. So the episode rundown helps you think like an editor while you're recording. You're thinking about the ordering of things. And even your prep doc, the one I create every episode, for example, is structuring that interview according to how I'm gonna edit it. But that is not foolproof. I'm still taking this raw file and I'm rearranging things. I'm moving things around. I'm also cutting things for runtime. So you have to go from this giant file down to the final cut. And it's not always a straight line. So it's yet another mini mess inside the larger mess of making the whole show. So back to the supersuit thing, if you have the heads-up display, that lens through which you see everything, it's also how you see the edit. So I'm not just deciding to cut things for runtime. I mean, that's part of it. But mostly I'm deciding, well, if I see the world this way, if how stories happen is meant to illuminate this about storytelling, how do I best do that in the episode? So a piece might be good or an answer might be good in theory, in general, but I'm not trying to make a generalized, expert-based show. I have a premise. I have a certain lens through which I'm pressing this content. So I can use that to vet, does this moment make the final cut or not? So the rundown, but also the premise. The stitching of the suit, but also the heads-up display, it actually makes it easier to stand up and walk around. In other words, do the edit and make it feel of a piece. I'm trying to explore one premise with every episode.
Okay, so now I'm actually editing the pilot episode with Andrew Davis, and I noticed that probably because we're friends, but also because I'm figuring out how to operate this supersuit, everything we talk about, because it happened during the interview, is relevant to the premise. We're not lionizing Drew as some amazing speaker and storyteller, even though he is. We're trying to get really close to his craft and how he thinks about it. What is his process, his practice, and his posture as a storyteller, so we can all mimic that, so we can all learn from that, so we can become masters too. So the material is all on premise, which is great. But I spent way too much time, probably because we're close to each other, on the warm moments to get to know the guest and relate to him. So I have a little bit of a hatchet job I have to pull out to remove some things that feel precious. In the production world, they say you got to kill your darlings. So some of these things are really, really strong, but need to come out. So I'm going to be doing a lot of that chopping up and rearranging right now. But the good news is the rearranging part is pretty minimal because everything flows. The interview flows in line with the edit. That wasn't the case for a lot of my previous shows where I was trying to create one narrative arc and I didn't really have a plan for what the story beats were. So I would capture things in the moment that just kind of felt right and then have this total mess. At least now, it is raw clay, but it's kind of shaped like the thing I want to create. And now I'm doing things that look a little bit more like bringing out the final view of what it was meant to be. In other words, it's not radical changes here. These are a lot of incremental, tiny changes that I'm making. So that's what I'm working on today. Okay, so I found something to cut. And the only reason I know with clarity I should cut it is because I developed both the premise and more specifically the format, the rundown. Andrew and I go a little bit off the rails right away and start talking about the difference between being a keynote speaker and a breakout speaker. Very interesting stuff. And Drew had very many thoughtful things to say about that. But immediately, we're kind of putting him on a pedestal too much for a show that's about the minutia of making and the accessibility of being a great storyteller. So I don't know, it doesn't really fit the flow. And I know that for runtime, I'm going to want that to come out because he says other things in A block that are a little bit more relevant to the show. So I can make this cut with greater confidence. Even though up here I have a voice saying, keep it, it's gold, I'm going to have a better show because I'm able to focus and move through the edit in a more focused way as well.
That's the thing about making what matters. These ideas and projects that we have and care about, they're not things to be brainstormed. They're things to be developed actively through piloting our work in the real world. Our projects should end up feeling like our very own supersuits. They're tailor-made to each of us. They bring out your best, your unique traits and skills. They enhance your strengths and give you new superpowers because we all have to compete against everybody creating content to command the attention of our audiences today. When we actively pilot and develop our ideas, it gets easier to feel like we're stepping into a supersuit. And it's there that we can flex our making muscles and fly. On the next episode, I've gotten through plenty of messes in making this show so far, including piloting this thing privately. Now, I simply launch it. Simply was the right word there, right? Like launching big, important creative projects is simple? Yeah? Right? Right? Wait, why are you laughing?